Welcome back to the Start and Scale podcast. I'm your host, Jack Brandwood, and in this series, we're diving headfirst into the world of tech with the people who are coding the future from the front lines. This is the place where we refactor the way you think about scaling tech teams, debugging their journeys, reviewing their stories, and pushing boundaries to ship better insights. Whether you're a seasoned techie who's seen your fair share of legacy code, an aspiring professional ready to deploy your skills, or just fascinated by the world of technology, this episode will give you unique insights and practical takeaways to add to your backlog.
I started coding when I was 6.
So grab your headphones, commit to this listen, and let's sprint into another episode. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Jeff, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So all the way from Leeds today.
Yeah.
How was the journey? Okay.
It's fine. Yeah, it was uneventful, and that's what you want in a journey nowadays, really, especially on the train.
Correct. Look, I always like to start these things with a really deep question, which is, who is Jeff Watkins?
Well, hopefully me, unless I've been leading people astray for a number of years. I've been a lifelong technologist. I'm very lucky in that respect that I started coding when I was 6. No jokes, on a Commodore VIC-20, which imagine many of the listeners won't even know what it is nowadays. It's a proper retro computer, 8-bit, had, I think, 4 kilobytes of RAM, so we're talking very, very limited. But it was where I first learned some lines of code, and I've loved it ever since. So, I'm primarily a technologist, but I do other things as well. I'm a podcast host. I think I just find, that whole thing very, very interesting. I got late in on the zeitgeist of being a podcast host, though, but I felt like, well, why not do something a little bit different? I've always been interested in things like sound engineering and synthesizers as well, so I thought the idea, like maybe editing a podcast, would be really fun. And actually, at one point, we were ahead in viewership of NVIDIA's podcast, which was only for like a day, though. But like, wow, in your face, NVIDIA. I've all the way through my career, despite obviously having progressed in that career, I've always remained technical, and I feel like that's really important, that somewhere in leadership teams there are technical people who understand what's being delivered.
Incredible. Well, thank you. And I want to go into your journey in a bit more detail and how you got to where you are now. But in fact, before we do, you weren't always Jeff Watkins of Create Future. But what did you want to be when you grew up? And I always ask this question because our vision at Tact is to create a world where everyone gets their dream job. So I did show you some of the other pieces of art that we've had previously, and so there's no pressure.
No pressure at all.
Okay.
And draw a little bit of perspective even.
Oh, wow. So this is the part where I do usually try and guess what you're drawing. And
Yeah, it's going to be really boring, I'm afraid, because, as I said, from an age, very, very young age, was always really interested in computers. So I draw a really bad keyboard. Of course, keyboards don't look like this. That was there's some lines of code. I was very lucky.
Wow.
From a very, very young age, I knew what I wanted to do. And this is back before in schools they taught computing.
So anyone watching at home, sure, they can.
Bad rendition of a Commodore 20 with an old-fashioned TV. Yeah, I always wanted to do it, but as soon as I did it, I was hooked. I thought it's something I'm good at. At school, I did okay at school, but I think it was one of those things where it's the only thing where I had a major passion. I thought this is something I could really do. But now, at this point, when I was young, I didn't know about jobs in tech, obviously. And I think nowadays it's good that we are sending organizations into schools to tell them about jobs in tech, because that didn't exist when I was younger. And it could have put me off maybe if I thought, could have done any other career where there's careers that advisors say, go and take a job in X. Nobody was telling me to go and take a job in the thing I was really interested in. It was just that I was so steadfastly resolute on doing it. I went to college, did computing there, went to university, did computer science, and the rest is history. I literally started my first consulting job, and that's been me ever since.
Wow. But you've gone from being very hands-on coding-wise to not so much anymore.
Yeah, I think it is a consequence of being very senior in an organization, 500 500-person organization, Create Future, Edinburgh-based consultancy who I work for as the CTO. Day-to-day hands-on, less so. However, though, still doing some hands-on work. I'm currently studying for an artificial intelligence master's and actually doing hands-on coding, getting to brush up on my Python, which I'm rather enjoying. But also even at Create Future, when we're doing things like AI experiments, both me and my director of technology, we will be doing stuff that's technical. We'll be having a go with things and trialing things out. So yes, not as hands-on as I used to be when I was cutting code every day, but I still try and keep myself a little bit sharp. But nowadays, a lot of what we do is more around sort of the human elements of and the actual, I guess, the consequences of technology. I had no appreciation for the consequences of technology or for technology ethics or the humanities and how they concern technology when I first learned about computing and first went into the world of consulting. In fact, nobody was talking about that. So it's really refreshing nowadays to be able to talk about the human elements of technology.
And you talk about consequences there of technology. Really broad question. What consequences are you referring to?
So technology should be there to be for the betterment of the human condition, in my opinion. I'm sure opinions will vary on that. And in many cases it does. We look at how it's helped with things like healthcare, access to finances, access to knowledge, so many great things. But there are also other consequences. Things like how it's changing the way people think with the Google effect. And now I'm guessing what people will call in the fullness of time, like the ChatGPT effect of changing how, even from a measurable neuroscience point of view, how people's brains develop and how they think.
In a negative way, but
it's difficult to pass a judgment on it, but you could see some of it is negative. It's making us better information seekers than information retainers. Now, but I'd say on the negative side, there are things like some of the damage done by algorithmic social media. And I imagine that none of this was, or I'd hope to think that none of this was necessarily intended consequences. It's unfortunate that in tech, we've expanded so quickly. You know, it has changed so quickly. The tech now is not even 100%. It has cycled around so many times since I joined the industry. The tech is unrecognizable. And it will always be that way, I think. Unlike other industries that move, maybe, you know, there'll be an absolute epoch level change in 40 or 50 years. We're doing it every 5-10 years. And that doesn't sometimes means, you know, we rush to innovate and we rush to release stuff because it's so competitive that without thinking about the consequences on the human beings using it. And I think it's a fascinating topic. Now, I don't have a classical training in the humanities. Maybe at some point I will do, but it's something I'm incredibly interested in and do study. And my other half, who I run a podcast with, she's actually a trained anthropologist, and so she has a lot to say on this topic.
Oh, wow. And she's also technical, isn't she?
Yes. She's also doing a master's degree in artificial intelligence at the moment, cutting Python code, but she works in the cybersecurity sector.
Whoa. Okay. Having a background in anthropology.
It really helps with cybersecurity.
Yeah. Because I didn't realize the recent attack, like cyber attacks on
Marks and Spencer's and Co-op.
And Co-op, yeah. Because I don't know if they were human or...
From what I heard, the Marks and Spencer's one was effectively social engineering to get into provide an MFA reset. So yes, there's and figures show this. Cybercrime is on the rise. Cyber attacks are on the rise. The percentage of those that are against the human element is growing because it's getting harder and harder to get into more advanced systems that have got incredible AI-based threat detection and stuff like that. So what do you go after? You go after the soft target, the people who give into fear and uncertainty and doubt when you go, oh, God, I need this doing in 10 minutes because I need to pay this client, otherwise the deal will be off. And somebody goes, oh, right, of course I'll do that. And kind of switch, you know, the panic switches off the frontal lobes and the higher reasoning, and you do something regrettable. So more and more cybercrime is happening because it's against the soft target, which is the human being. Now, some people say that's the weakest link, but I think that's not a very nice way to put it. But we are the biggest target in when it comes to cyber crime and you know, cybersecurity incidents is the human being. because we can't be fully automated, we shouldn't be fully automated away, and we do things.
I guess our strength, which is our emotional intelligence as humans, can also be can turn into emotional stupidity. I don't know if that's the right thing to say. But
well, it's attackers do know what makes us tick. They'd make great behavioral scientists, some of them, I'm sure. I'm sure also, if the circumstances are right, some of these people doing this could make some great advancements in tech and human-computer interaction. But they know what makes us tick. They think about urgency. They think about fear. They think about appeals to authority. They think about all of these things that they're effectively trained into us societally, and they use them against us. So it's really important that you've built up some cyber resilience against that. And a lot of that's around education, but education doesn't mean behavioral change happens. There's also like the actual overall behavioral shift that needs to happen and the cultural shift that needs to happen in an organization that goes beyond just knowing about the threats, cyber threats. Many people know how bad smoking is for them. Doesn't necessarily stop them from smoking. And it's the same with insecure cybersecurity practices. And in fact, some rather unfortunate studies have shown that cybersecurity professionals are statistically more likely to do some inadvisable security practices than normal people because they think they know better. And that's just being human.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, God, I think it's just such an interesting, mix of two opposites that just kind of cross over in some weird Venn diagram of, I think it's so straight. I think it's so interesting. And yeah, just on the AI side of things, we have to talk about it.
Sure.
We've got to. You talked about the ethical uses of AI and how it should be used ethically. Do you have any thoughts on how we can make sure that it is used ethically?
It's a really tough topic because any ethicist or somebody who studies the humanities, one of the first things they'll tell you, like in big flashing red letters, is unfortunately ethics are not a checklist. You can't, there's no secret sauce thing and go tick, 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 right, we're ethical. It's highly cultural and it's highly kind of contextual. There are many principles you can look at and decide whether or not your company is acting ethically. Now, and there's also a big divide between what's ethical and what's legal. So at the very least, you should be aimed to be beyond legally compliant, just in case. But so I did a study of, I think it's about 55 different organizations across the world, public and private sector. I looked at all of their AI principles, and there's quite a list of them in the end. But if you've got a list of principles, you can't make it too long because nobody will remember them. So what are the top principles globally in AI, and this largely driven by what they mean to people. And it turns out a lot of customers really want things like transparency of what you're doing. So transparency and explainability, and proportionality of use of the data in AI. So it's a really difficult topic, but it's one that's definitely worth learning. I think it's definitely one that's worth thinking about because one of the things I worry about is not necessarily companies just going and doing ethical things. The UK, we're now at the juncture between the US, which is highly deregularized, which sounds good on paper, but things like regulated industries such as financial services and life sciences probably makes them a bit nervous. And the EU, where the EU AI Act is very strong, we're sat somewhere in the middle, and we've got this juncture where we're actually also third in the world when it comes to AI research and skills. So we should capitalize on this. And what we don't want is a situation where ethics and the legalities and regulation are so confusing that companies don't act. I think that's a really bad case situation where companies get too nervous to actually act about it. So I think there's a great deal of education we need in this country, in this nation, around how to adopt AI ethically, safely, sustainably, responsibly, all under the banner of responsible AI, which is an incredibly important topic. And I think some of this needs to come from the government and also they need to kind of set out the stall on AI regulation because currently we're in this slight grey zone. And the clearer they can make that, the clearer they can make those kind of guardrails to work with him and how to self-assess and things like that, the sooner we can get to innovating.
Just to be on the nose with it, I guess what happens if we don't have that regulation in soon?
I think we'll just lag behind because companies, and it'll be the small to medium-sized enterprises or startups, they will start to lag. they won't know what our stances are. And I think this regulation also needs to be hand in hand with other things like sovereign investments, investment in skills. It's part of a wider package of things like the AI Opportunities Action Plan, which was released a few months ago. We need to put that into action. If we start to slide behind, to slide further down in the rankings and don't capitalize on this, I think this is a generational opportunity for the UK, because we are actually pretty good at tech. And it's one of those ones where we stand a really good chance of doing really well in. We'll never catch up to the US. They're too far ahead. But actually, if you look at when it comes to skills and powers and stuff, we're not that drastically far behind China, who's number 2. So this is an opportunity for the UK to have great both societal and economic benefit from AI. And the societal benefit will come from improving our public services using AI, which I've been lucky enough to work on some of that, only in small parts. But I could see the bigger picture of, wow, this could revolutionize our country if it was adopted at scale. But then there's also the economic benefits of providing services, research, and other things, and software to the global stage.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting. I don't know enough about it to probe any further, unfortunately, without sounding stupid. But that makes complete sense. Yeah, and if we are third in the world, like you said, this could be such a massive moment for us. I always say this when I'm speaking to people about AI on this podcast and just in general, is that I've lived through some quite amazing moments in terms of technology, like the iPhone and I'm not a computer, unfortunately. I'm not that old, but no offense, but but I've lived through the iPhone, and at the time I think I wasn't savvy enough to realize what an amazing moment this was. But now with AI, I'm like, oh my God, I'm recognizing it, I'm living through it. And I think with anything, as soon as it becomes easily used by the public, it becomes a massive thing.
Exactly. So AI has been around since the 50s.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so there was a conference in the 50s where they set out in 6 weeks, I think it was, it's the Dartmouth conference, I believe it's called. And they said in the 6 weeks or whatever it was, they were going to fully bottom out the topic of AI. Now, I think they were being very optimistic. But the point is, so this is 1957. So this is just shortly after, a few years after, his name escapes me now. Very famous computer scientist who was played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Alan Turing, sorry.
Yes.
Moment there. Alan Turing, this is very shortly after Alan Turing, a few years after Alan Turing had written his paper on the imitation game, which later became the Turing test. And we went through several winters, because one of the big things about AI is when you get machines to learn off data and do these kind of things at scale, it turns out you need a lot of computing power and a lot of data storage. And that was bytes, maybe kilobytes tops in the 50s. There's pictures in the 50s of people wheeling a 10 megabyte hard disk into an IBM building and it taking 6 people to wheel it in on a dolly, and it being like 7 feet tall and 6 feet wide. That's a 10 megabyte, we're talking 10 gigabytes. You wouldn't even have 10 gigabytes on your phone nowadays. It'd be like 64 gigabytes or something like that. You can get terabyte SD cards that are this big. So we've seen such an incredible change in tech. And now we're getting to the point where AI is really possible at consumer grade. And of course, the other side is generative AI becoming a thing. Effectively, the creation of generative AI, old-fashioned AI, is more called discriminative AI. It classifies things. Is that a cat, or is that a dog, or maybe it looks at online and makes a prediction of some numbers, but for the most part, it wasn't generating much new content. And I believe the zeitgeist moment there, and I'm sure we all remember, it was when you could go on to chatgpt.com. So I'd seen GPT-2 a couple of years earlier, and it was a curio, interesting. But then just being able to go on and democratized it for the whole world, which might have caused them some hosting problems. Democratize it for the whole world. Everybody can go on and chat with an AI. And for the first time, this will be of people outside the tech industry. 80% of people maybe outside of a film have even heard of AI. And it blows my mind that was the zeitgeist moment.
Wow. Yeah. And again, I'm not technical, of course, but I know there's discriminative AI. I didn't realize it was called that. Gen AI, and I just think agentic AI is so interesting. Just the possibilities of it is wild, you know. But then it's scary to think about the amount of roles that will be displaced because of the introduction of it. I mean, even now you've seen, I was talking to someone this morning about junior engineers struggling to find a role, which is worrying. What do you think of that?
So I think there's a bit of context, and people always point to when people like IBM and other organizations are letting people go and going, oh, this is because of AI. And we have to remember that post-COVID, there was a big push to digitization. I think there's like a 300% growth in digitization of services because people went, oh no, we can't deliver this in person easily anymore. So like, why do we digitize it? And now if you look at that kind of ramp off of all of those projects, I think there's an adjustment. Effectively, you know, you have a boom, there's got to be an adjustment. So, but on the other hand, I do agree that I think it's more challenging to become a junior developer nowadays. The number of developers does keep geometrically expanding, though. Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin, said that roughly since Alan Turing, it's doubled every 5 years or so.
Wow.
Now, that's not quite linear, but we've seen the number of developers even now is still growing, and people have got an alternate route in, not university anymore, with boot camps and things like that. And I think, unfortunately, that level of growth was never going to be sustainable at the pace we had it, especially when it was a lot of people moved careers in COVID. I know because I was part of a group that helped teach some career retrainers who went into coding. So there's people moving into coding, career returners, career retrainers, great. But was that growth ever sustainable? And I think to pin it all on AI is not necessarily right. But of course, AI is going to displace or change jobs. And I think being a junior engineer is going to be harder. Getting it on the first rung of the ladder is going to be harder, at least for a while, until the market settles down. But also, AI coding tools aren't replacing coders anytime soon, like properly. I don't think so. Because there's been a number of organizations that tried this and then gone, we've made a real mess for ourselves, because it turns out you still need people to, AI at the moment, at least, who knows about the future, it's a co-pilot. Now, agentic models and things like GitHub Copilot, they've released the agentic version. It's not as recognizably as a co-pilot as the previous one, which we imagine is incredibly fancy autocomplete. That's dumbing it down, but you have to be at the IDE. Now, the new one will go away and code for you and create PRs, but you still need to be there to review it. You still need to be there to make sense of it all. The other thing is, of course, if you've got code that nobody understands, that's just a ticking time bomb. Because at some point you'll need to understand that code. And believe me, I struggle enough to understand my own code 6 months after I've written it. So if another machine has written it and not necessarily in the most elegant way, they've got no chance.
But I guess it will. Do you think it will tighten teams up though, like make them leaner?
So we're writing a white paper on this kind of topic at the moment, and I think this is a useful thing. I think this is a good positive thing. So making teams smaller is a positive thing. So we're moving more nowadays to more things like value stream aligned teams, because the whole idea of like you got a front end team, you got a back end team is always a bit of a faff with things like handing over. And people got to the point where, well, actually, we don't want to spin up a new team, so we'll just make the existing team bigger and bigger and bigger. And that, I don't know if you've seen that diagram where it shows like 2 points, 3 points is a triangle, 4 points is a square, but then with and it shows all the lines of communication between them as a team, and then you get to like 15, and there's too many lines. And this is why, like in Agile, say, maybe it should be 8 teams of 8 and 10 tops, and then you see companies going, well, we can get away with 10, so they do 10. And it means everything becomes just a little bit harder. Now, if you can be more productive and higher quality, not just in the code, but other areas as well, and people look at AI in the software delivery lifecycle and go, it's just about the coding copilot. It's not. If half your team is developers, half the team is not developers, developers only spend about 20% of the time actually writing code, 20 to 30%. So if you half that, what we're talking is like 10 to 15% of the time in a team is spent writing code. Let's also consider the rest of that time, because the rest of that time is important too. And a lot of that's about the requirement. So you can turbocharge that as well. And this is what we're writing about, how we've done it. But the idea is actually you should be able to get away with tighter teams. Why not? have tighter teams because it actually is more efficient. And this means you can run more teams at once, maybe. And you can have teams using AI tooling to deliver high quality stuff at pace. Actually, with it helping things like managing the estimates and the burn down and automating stuff that should be automated. Leaving the teams to get on being value stream aligned and delivering really high quality stuff. So I think absolutely it'll be a net benefit when we've got all the tools and not just the coding co-pilots in place to turbocharge the SDLC.
Wow. Because it's bizarre to think that you would always be told when you went to university, go into engineering, go into some sort of technology, you'd be fine. You'll always have a job. And it's weird that people are going into uni now, coming out with a computer science degree, whatever it might be, and coming out kind of like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But you feel like there's going to be an adjustment, and you feel like hopefully once that adjustment's made, things will...
I think it will even out over time. I think so, because also the world has an increasing demand for software.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this idea that AI is going to take some of the jobs by creating more code presumes that like software just stays flat. We're not going to create more. The demand for software will remain constant. It's going to continue to increase as the world becomes increasingly digital, and there's more different kinds of form factors and devices. I think it'll change. It'll always change. The tech industry's always changed, but it will continue to grow. I mean, maybe that's not forever. It's not going to be until the heat death of the universe, but certainly for the next 20 or 30 years, I imagine.
I hate to ask you this, but where do you think AI will be in like 5 years' time, or do you think it's unimaginable?
Well, any prediction, if I knew it, I'd be definitely telling you the answer from a yacht, would be live streaming from a yacht.
Yeah.
First of all, I think agentic's a big thing. And it's mainly the integration opportunities and things like MCP and other tools and lingua franca, the kind of ability to speak between agents and other systems. People start to design websites and systems and APIs to be more user-friendly, but when the user is AI. So imagine when we're talking about UX, because nowadays when we talk about UX, we're going to be talking about user experience, but we're also talking about developer user experience for some things. We're going to start talking about the AI user experiences and how consumable is and usable is your site and data and things like services for AI, because that will be where the magic unlocks for integration opportunities. I mean, we've seen it on a limited scale, but not to do with AI, but with things like open banking. It's because they forced that, and that actually more opportunities arose for innovation in the field. So I think agentic AI is going to be one of the biggest things we see for a while. I don't think we're going to see kind of artificial general intelligence, despite all the promises to the contrary. Not in 5 years. People were making the same claims about quantum supremacy and things like that 5 years ago, saying that by 2025 we'll have broke the discrete logarithm problem and we'll have all had to change cryptography, blah, blah, blah. This was the head of AI, IBM at the time, I think.
So what is the discrete logarithm problem?
It is, this probably goes beyond my pay grade maths-wise, but basically, part of cryptography is there are certain mathematical things that you need, if you could solve easily, would break cryptography instantly. But these things are, especially to do with things like large prime numbers, are incredibly hard to reverse engineer efficiently. Now, quantum computing can do some of these near instantly if it was of sufficient size and power, whereas our traditional computing would take trillions of years. So if you can break existing cryptography near instantly, it becomes worthless. And people were worried that would already have happened by 2025. We're nowhere near, I don't think.
That quantum computing thing, I've tried to look at. God, I do not understand it at all.
Me neither.
Thank God.
Full disclosure, people have explained it time and time again, and it's like, no idea at all.
Yeah, God.
But the great Brian Kernighan has said, he's one of the people who, along with Dennis Ritchie, wrote the absolute Bible on C programming. He just says, look, functional programming, I just don't get it. It's beyond me. So if people like the great Brian Kernighan can not grok like hard tech terms, I feel more comfortable.
Thank God. Yeah, this feels loads better. You mentioned there around earlier about AI not being adopted because people are slightly worried about or not having guardrails in place. If you were a business owner or someone seeing you in a business and you want to start using AI but you don't know where to start, what would you do? Or would you advise them that they do?
So it depends on, I think it really depends on the risk levels of what you're doing. If you're running a florists and you run an AI flower arranger generator, then your risk levels are pretty low. If you're running say a healthcare startup, health tech startup, your risk level is going to be pretty high. So I would like to see basic AI literacy across the nation, and especially for business owners, or maybe like a higher bar of AI literacy. The EU AI Act is mandating AI literacy for companies that are using AI in some way, either building or using AI, which means almost everybody. So it's like cybersecurity literacy, cybersecurity awareness training. It's really important. I think getting literacy, if you just start with basic literacy, because when we did a lot of primary research over 1,000 UK businesses at Create Future, is our own commissioned research, and found that a lot of organizations, they wanted it, but then first of all, they didn't understand it at all. It's just like AI, that's cool. And also, I'd certainly had no skills in it. So it's also consider how you get those skills in. And that might mean taking on a consultancy, even if it's just for literally just a few hours or a day or two, just to demystify it all and to go over what the opportunities are. So we do an AI innovation workshop. It takes half a day. Not salesy here at all, but what I'm saying is this gives you an idea of how quickly you can get some kind of better idea of the way forward. And we give a basic intro and look at the opportunities in the business and kind of help rank them a little bit and say, look, here's some of the things you could be doing. But here's also what the path forward is for you, because it's not always obvious to, especially for not the companies. There's plenty of companies out there that have a digital footprint, but they're not tech companies. They're not Spotify or Microsoft, or they are companies that need to have a digital footprint because that's what you have to do in the world today to get along.
Yeah. Last time we spoke, you mentioned a staggering fact of the amount of people that are computer illiterate. Is that how technically illiterate? Can't use computers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what the figure was.
Me neither.
Okay. It was a lot. Anyway,
Yeah.
anyone listening. And you just made me think about it, obviously, on this AI train right now, but my nan, every time she WhatsApps me, will set up a new WhatsApp group between me and her saying grandma and grandson. You know what I mean? She doesn't really understand technology, which is fair enough because she wasn't brought up with it. I know that we're going to see the first digitally native generation, which is awesome. And I just think it must be mind-boggling for anybody older who wasn't brought up with technology to even fathom what AI is. It's wild.
It's good. This is a really important thing. I think you just mentioned here is the digital divide will widen thanks to AI unless we do something about it. It's a big problem because also part of this digital divide widening with the adoption of AI, things like misinformation and deep fakes, they're now becoming so convincing that professionals in organizations are falling for video and audio deep fakes. And they found that globally, phishing or voicemail phishing, even if it's not deepfake, just kind of somebody using whatever tooling to create voicemail to do phishing, actually is 3 times more likely to succeed. Now, audio video deepfakes are even more convincing. So if professionals are falling for this, like the general public don't stand any chance. We saw poor Martin Lewis, he was very understandably outraged about it because I saw the interview with him on television where somebody being deep faking him, advising this, this particular crypto scam effectively. I've seen that video. It's not bad actually. And this is a couple of years ago and the deep fakes are getting better. There was a lot of Elon Musk deep fakes about a crypto scam, which were mostly quite badly done, but they were 3 years old. And nowadays that technology moves on so quickly. So I think the digital divide, not only from the accessibility for this tech, but also the dangers. I don't know what I'd call this digital divide of like the danger divide, like, it's going up as cyber threats to, companies are, we hear about M&S and the Corp and stuff like that, but the cyber threats to individuals are on the rise as well. And with the advent of accessible AI that's usable by bad actors, this threat is it's going to be the next. It's really people, banks and things like that are going to have to figure out how they can help prevent people being conned out of billions, potentially, not individually, but people being conned out of huge sums of money on a daily basis, because it'll be like you call me up and be like, oh, I'll come over or whatever, and it's not you at all. It's and this is all, none of this is science fiction anymore. If you mention this 20 years ago, this was science fiction. You see in movies where they deep fake people. I think The Running Man has one where they composite deep fake Arnie and Jesse Ventura together. Nowadays, that's just entirely doable in real time. This was science fiction 30 years ago. It's mind-boggling. But yes, this digital divide is going to grow unless we do something about it to help close that digital divide. And we're going to see the next generation of not just kind of, I guess, online web natives. The web is now, this year, 30 years old, roughly.
Right.
So I remember the day before the web. I used to go online, but not on the web before the web, and so I remember it being a very different experience. So 30 years old now, the web. Now we're going to have soon the first AI natives, people who can't remember what it's like in a world without using AI on a daily basis. And there'll be people who are entirely alienated by that, which is really unfortunate.
Alienated, I think that's a really good word to use. It's wild, isn't it? And it's tough to even think or guess what the world's going to be like in 5 years' time, because you just can't even fathom what's going to change. I mean, if Tomorrow's World was around now, the program, I just don't think he'd get anything right. And I don't think he ever did. But anyway, just to go back onto, I guess, what you do in your business and your day to day. Obviously, you're helping people and businesses solve tech problems and build things. I always like to ask people who work for consultancies: is there any particular pattern of problems that emerge or you get asked to fix regularly?
I think nowadays a lot of them are product problems, and they're not necessarily problems. I think it's the approach to figuring out what is the right product, because a lot of organizations do think, oh, well, we've got product ideas in mind, and those ideas might be fine, but there's a lot of edges to knock off them. And I think a lot of it is around, well, actually, how are you creating something that differentiates in today's society? If it's a product, how do you create something that differentiates? Because if you're just doing what Klarna did, but 5 years later, well, you're too late. Unless you've got some other USP. If you're just doing what somebody else did, but at a smaller scale and later, you've got to figure out what is that North Star you're heading towards. What's that USP? What differentiates you? And then how to turn that into a really good digital product. Because also there's a layer of, there has to be technical feasibility around it. And the other thing is then, in today's speed-oriented world where things change so quickly, is how do you deliver that? Like an MVP. I know MVP is much overused, but how do you deliver some kind of service quickly, but without burning too many bridges along the way? Because you can get something out there. People say, ship fast and break stuff. Doesn't work very well on app stores when you end up with a 1-star product. You need to work hard to recover from that. So how do you ship fast, not break too much stuff, and create some really good customer sentiment along the way? And we've done that with Martin Lewis's on app. The entire product brief was great. It was and the product brief came from Martin Lewis himself. I'll put Martin Lewis in people's pockets. I tell you what, though, it was evocative. It was like, oh, what could we be doing with that? And then when AI came along, we actually went back to Mr. Lewis himself and went, actually, we could do this for you with all your rich information over thousands of pages. You could have a conversational bot that can tell you about all your top, like, we showed him a demo, and like, can we have this live? And like, okay. And then it's like, how do you actually make that a reality safely? So it was, we've got some really fascinating products we worked on, and a lot of it is around making sure we're building not only building the right thing for customers, but also building the thing right at the same time. That balance between the two things, because a lot of organizations aren't tech organizations, and they'll start quick, but then they'll hit kind of a bit of an inflection point where they've collected too much technical debt. So sometimes if we're brought in sometimes we're looking at new products, and sometimes we're brought in to help augment teams or fix a problem. And sometimes that is down to engineering maturity, and that's not necessarily a slight on anybody, because they're not engineering organizations. They're organizations that need software engineering. And they've started quick, and they've started to slow down because they haven't gotten a mature approach to technical debt or engineering practices. So they're a couple of the really big things we see a lot of.
So a business comes to you and they say, Jeff, we've got this great idea for a product that we want to roll out, but we're not sure if it's any good, really. How do you advise them? Because that's a really good point you made about the app. That whole, like you said, ship fast, make mistakes, get feedback, fix it. But like I said, if it's then at the cost of your reputation, that's kind of a bad thing.
Yeah. So, and this goes slightly out of my area, more into sort of product design and strategy pieces, but we do a lot of work on things like user testing. Like we'll work with user interviews and things like that, but also research into market and what's the taste in the markets, what have other people done. But like not necessarily to copy it, but to think about, well, could we go even further with that? What is the taste? Because also, what have other people done that really didn't work? Because there are some things you just go, that was a terrible idea because there's some unintended consequences. But what can we learn from that? So we spend a lot of time around that. And actually AI helps with that research process as well. Because there's sometimes things like Google Gemini's deep research, you can go away and find 1,000 different sources for you and condense that down into some really good market research quite quickly. Something that would have taken weeks before now takes 10 minutes. It's not the fastest of all the AI tools, but my God, it does a good job. You will come out with a huge, well-formatted report in a document that gives you really, really loads of information that's taking you, because it's going scraping hundreds of sites. It would have taken you a very long time to get all that. And then along with things like user research, and even with user research, people are now toying with the idea of things like synthetic personas and synthetic research to try and not to actually do real research, but it's almost to knock the corners off things, to spot the obvious things before you go in. To spot the obvious cases, because it's almost like how do you break down a massive list of questions and a massive list of constraints in a way that means you don't have to remember it all or put it on in a big old spreadsheet. And actually doing that with AI really helps. And that just streamlines the process a little bit. But then we do quite often we do this in tight loops as well. If we're going to do like kind of design related research and design related pieces, we'll do them in quite tight loops to get to the point where we feel like we've got to something that's viable, and then we can start delivering it, but also at the same time not necessarily stopping all our research and design. Actually, you might be refining stuff as you are going along, but there's a certain point at which it makes sense to start building something. You got to the point where you feel like you've got rid of all the really stupid ideas.
Synthetic research, that's so interesting. And again, not technical, but am I right in saying that you would just create a persona? You would create a persona of and like an AI persona.
Yeah. So people are now using tools to create AI personas based on sort of various different variables and things like that. And again, it's to like challenge thinking. Go, what happens if you got this particular demographic or this particular combination of characteristics and traits? It's not something I'm a massive expert in, but I know some of my colleagues have done some of this, and it's fascinating use of the technology to. No, and it's never should be in really in pursuit of removing actual users from the loop. But what it does is it helps knock the corners off stuff really quickly before you go into like real research.
You strike me as, I know you don't know what I'm saying, you strike me as a very T-shaped person in terms of like, I feel like you understand a lot about, you understand everything.
Jack of all trades, master of none, I think is the phrase.
But that's the master of one, we always say. But yeah, I think you understand a lot of stuff, and you're deep, obviously, in your specialism. I just think that's the best way to be, especially with like again AI coming in. Isn't that just like what you should be doing?
I think in tech nowadays, now this has been my advice to people early in their careers, is make sure you've got a good foundation of a number of different things, because just writing code isn't good enough anymore.
Yeah.
I think it limits you too much. Building up, like I enjoy doing talks and podcasts and things like that, and I didn't used to enjoy doing them.
Really?
I had to force myself into doing some of these things because it builds up other skills. And as somebody said to me recently, talking about, I don't like the term soft skills, prefer the term impact skills, because they're the things that are Some of them are quite tacit. You can tell people how to be a good conversationalist all you like, but actually having conversations and building those skills, it's a tacit thing. You can't teach somebody to ride a bike. They've got to get on and ride the bike.
Yeah.
Tech skills, much more definitive. You can learn. You can teach somebody to write it in JavaScript. You can teach somebody the syntax. Even then, you still got to practice it and have a go at it yourself. But I think getting a broader range of skills is so important nowadays, because it used to be consultancy 26 years ago when I first started consultancy. You write code. You write some code. You read the requirements. You have very few meetings. But that meant that, first of all, systems were simple back then. Secondly, they weren't very user-facing for the most part. I was writing things like banking interchange systems. The trading systems, banking interchange systems, they weren't products and websites, things like that. But also, we got to a point where we were building the wrong things at some points. The industry realized they needed to change. They needed to think about how we build the right things, because just sitting down and writing code was not necessarily the best use of 100% of your time. Because you can write loads of code, and if the code's no good, it's pointless. You've wasted your time. In fact, it might be worse. You've polluted the rest of the state, with more code than is necessary. And I've always said that about when I try hiring developers. I will look for the ones who are probably going to write as not that much code, but I'd rather write the right code, than a lot of wrong code, because you have to go back and fix it all and it becomes a real mess.
How do you identify people like that when you're hiring for them?
I think it's attitude. Seeing how they work as well if you're going to do any coding tests or, any problems, like what's their attitude to how they approach something, how many questions they ask, what's their discussion around the point like before they just go, right, fine, get on with it. And this is the same with like using ChatGPT. I found that I get a lot more sense out of it if I put use the clarifying questions pattern to say, you must ask me any clarifying questions you think you need before you give me an answer.
Ooh,
it's a prompt engineering trick.
Yeah,
and it really helps, because what it does is it goes, it will have some things that it is unclear on, thanks to pattern matching. It'll go, well, I don't think this is matching well enough, and eventually we get to the point where it is confident to give you an answer. And it's to say, I almost think like prompt engineering tricks should be used on human beings, because human beings, I think, quite often with requirements, when you ask somebody to do something, we like our own coping mechanisms. We try and figure out what it is you've actually just asked. Mm-hmm. Now, with prompt engineering, the key is to be quite specific, quite explicit about things. Ask me any clarifying questions, or here's an example of what the output should look like. Here's the things you should avoid. Here's the things you should include. You have to be quite specific, and I wonder how much more stuff would get done right first time if we had human prompt engineering.
Is that management? I don't know if it is, but
do you know what? It might be the name of my first book.
Hey, there you go. Well, just to talk about, because this is the Start and Scale podcast, and I know we've gone a bit of a tangent on AI, but I think you're a very interesting person to speak to, and I know that you're passionate about it. Can you run me through, I guess, your background in starting technical teams, scaling technical teams? How big is your technical team now?
Well, currently I'm running a very small team because I run our AI team, which is very small. Okay. Before that, I was running the engineering team, which was 300 people. I think it was about maybe 70 when I joined.
Bloody hell.
Right. So, yeah. And I've managed various teams over the years of scale up, scale down, things like that. It's always a challenge scaling a team because, or just a company in general, because I joined BJSS, who just sold a CGI for a very large sum of money, I assume, maybe 3,000 people. I joined when it was 27 people. Wow. So yeah, it was very small. So I'd been through that scale up journey. But I was junior at the time, so I was watching it like from the sidelines going, this is crazy. Although it took them a while, so they were organic growth. Uh-huh. I joined Digital when it was maybe a couple of hundred people, and then left when it was 1,500 people. But that was in 2.5 years, so that was a much quicker growth. Then that was like, when you see people going through hypergrowth, well, that's really interesting because I hadn't really had the term before, hadn't seen how PE investment and hypergrowth works. So it was fascinating. But you always hit teething troubles when you hit certain levels. When you get to your first to 100 or so people, you realize, oh, we're a real company now. Then you get to about 500 people, go, oh, we're a real company now. And there's stuff, even with 100 people, you could just about know everybody's name. 500 people, unless you've got an incredible memory, you can't know everybody's name. And this is, how do you break down? How do you cut a company? Do you cut a company by region? Do you cut it by things like industry verticals? And how do you then cut teams up? How do you then line manage teams? And despite endless frustrating research, and we tried different models, and the answer is there's no perfect answer. If there's a perfect answer, everybody would use it. Like even the Spotify model. Spotify apparently don't use the Spotify model nowadays. Remember, it's like a few years old now. So, but the thing is, like, we learn more about team dynamics, and especially with things like now we're moving to sort of hybrid and remote. But there are no perfect answers. But the other thing, there are some things that are definitely like bad smells. Is like having individual teams that are far too big, overloading line managers, having really poor communication channels, overloading people communication. There's a whole bunch of things you should avoid. Like, what's right is like super contextual,
right,
and an ecumenical matter. But what's wrong, there are some things that are just demonstrably, like, if you have succeeded by, I don't know, having scrum teams of 25 people, it's not because you had a scrum team of 25 people. It's you succeeded despite having a scrum team of 25 people. As I've been in teams where, like, you need to split this team up.
Yeah.
Like, oh, but we're delivering. I bet you deliver faster if you split it up a bit. And it's like, turns out, yes, you do deliver faster if you split it up a bit. I think organizations also need to really understand when they're growing, it's making sure you're growing in proportions. It's no good growing weirdly shaped. Like, make sure you understand what proportion of skills you have in an organization. Because if your work shifts and that's out of balance, and you get exposed really quickly. But it's also then important to make sure you hire. I think this is the challenge when it comes to scaling people, is you want more people quickly in. But you want to hire the right people who are multi-skilled, who've got like a great willingness to learn and can also apply themselves into multiple domains. Not they'll ask questions but not complain too much, and they'll roll up the sleeves and get stuck in. That's really easy when you've got like 30 people to hire the right kind of attitude. When you're hiring, we need another 50 people in 2 months. Like, that's really hard to hire, to have no duds in that lot. Because you can hire, again, it's like the technical skills. Fine, you need to be technical competent, but I'll take attitude over whether or not somebody's 10% better. If somebody's a 10% better coder versus way better when it comes to the actual existential flexibility and people skills, I'll take that every day, because most of the problem solving we do isn't that hard. There's been a couple of occasions in my career where the problems have been genuinely difficult, and some of those have been I've watched on the sideline as other teams have solved. At BJSS, we were rebuilding, not me personally, I was rebuilding a different system, but we were redesigning the NHS Spine. That's the world's largest messaging broker.
Wow.
That's complex technically. A lot of other things, they may be novel and they may be interesting, but they're not necessarily like pushing the boundaries of tech. So what you don't necessarily want is your super hot 10x coder who everybody hates working with. You want your people who are good, but also have a lot of flexibility and willing to apply themselves in different domains and get on with people and be good to work with.
Yeah, and that 10x coder you talked about, then you just tag them in if you need them, right? If you're working on something ultra complex. Wow. So when you were working on that for the NHS, I don't know how much you can say really, but what was it like? I mean,
so I wasn't on that team. I was working on a parallel stream for NHS e-referrals. So I was replacing Choose and Book, which is a £400 million system that had outlived its. It was old.
Wow.
It was expensive to maintain. So we designed from scratch a replacement called e-referrals. It's still in use today. If you're in England, you referred for something. So that's planned care, not emergency care. It uses this system, and it moved from 50% of referrals being paper and 50% being digital to 100% being digital, and each one of those saved about £50. See, and there's tens of millions of users on e-referrals, so that's actually a significant save. So how did that feel? It was really hard. It was like the live weekend it had to be a big bang switchover due to the way the old system worked. None of us slept for 72 hours. We started hallucinating. We were so tired. I almost fell asleep in the middle of a conversation, stood up. I was so tired. It was a rough time, but I tell you what, though, it was one of the most gratifying parts of my career, knowing that I built a system that was going to save the taxpayer tens, maybe even hundreds of millions over its lifespan. It was going to improve access to care for people through it being quicker, because it's actually much faster to use. So when you get a 10-minute GP appointment, more of it's spent with you rather than fighting with the system.
Yeah.
But also gives better access to different kinds of services that they couldn't provide. So that was great. That was super positive. It was certainly a big lesson in delivering a big public sector system from scratch, from first principle, all the way from scratch, all the way to live. I lost a lot of sleep, but it was very gratifying.
Wow. That must be incredible. And like I said, it's usually those times. I always think in your job, stress can be a really, really good thing. Like that sounds like you're quite stressed at the time when that was going on. I think what's worse than being stressed at your job is being indifferent. Like being indifferent at work, I think is just the worst thing that can possibly happen to you. And also I think that work is one of the most important things because it affects all aspects of your life. Physical health, family life, mental health, of course. I think it's just wild that people don't put more effort into finding the right thing a lot of the time. Or when you're an interviewer and you're hiring for somebody, that people aren't trained on that, and you kind of just pick it up, don't you, as you go. You must have done that when you first managing. Right?
So I did a lot of interviewing, especially for BJSS. It must have been probably not overestimating when I say 1,000. And I was never trained to do it because I also started many, many moons ago when the idea of interview training and things like that was not really a thing. But yeah, people should be trained on leadership and management and interviewing and stuff like that. Again, like with the leadership, you can give people principles and stuff. You have to have a go at yourself.
Yeah.
Like with interview training, I can train people all day on interview, but without doing some exercises where you actually interview each other and, it's awfully uncomfortable. Nobody enjoys doing it. But without doing those, you can't say you've really learned it. A lot of life has to be tacit, I think,
That's a great word. I've never heard that word before.
Because the map is not the territory.
Oh.
Right,
Is that from Shane Parrish? A guy called Shane Parrish who talks about the map is not the territory.
I can't remember the original. It was. I think it might have been a philosopher who first coined it. But it was actually on the idea that because you see a globe actually as well. A globe, and people assume countries are certain sizes because of a globe. It's like actually no, it's just because of how like spherical projection works. If you look at real proportions of countries are completely different. But also maps, is the map wrong? If you go, well, this isn't on the map, well, it's not on the map that's wrong. So it is the map that's wrong, isn't it? Because the territory is the real thing, and it's when you put something into concretion that it really matters.
Yeah,
in life in general.
yeah, of course, yeah, and you just got to try it out. And I think that another point, and I know it's been talked to death about the whole fail forward and fail as much as possible. And obviously, it sounds a bit cheesy saying it now, but I just genuinely do think it is the most important. If you can fail as quick as possible without being deterred and losing losing confidence, I think that's the best thing you could possibly do.
Yeah. So there's a couple of, I learned this from one of my podcast guests. I think it might have been Paula Sizek, who works for a consultancy who does change. There's two types of change in life, and you really need to understand them broadly. There's safe to fail ones, where if you fail, nothing explodes, and you can manage that, and you can fix forward. And then there's fail safe ones, i.e. ones that if this fails, you've got to put all the things in place for it not to fail, or if it does, it's got to fail in a safe way, so it doesn't blow your company up. And I think it's the same with a lot of things in life. It's like understanding when you can break things, and part of it is breaking things down enough as well. I think if you break things down enough, then actually small failures are much more palatable than large failures in general. It's pretty logical, really, isn't it? And there's another gentleman we interviewed called Stéphane Guillard, he runs the Journal of Trial and Error, one of the huge brain Forbes 30 under 30 person who's talking about failure in organizations and when things go wrong. And a lot of it is making sure that you've got an environment in which really dangerous failures shouldn't happen. They shouldn't rely. If I log into a production database and drop all the tables and take the entire bank down, that shouldn't entirely be my fault, because why was I given live access to data that I really didn't need? Why did I have permission to drop all the tables with nothing else happening? Why was there no monitoring alerting on that? Why was there no ability to like completely kill switch and bring that back? You know, it's very easy to blame somebody for doing something inadvisable, but actually, or for a failure, but actually think about the system, the systemic issues that surround all of that let that happen. And then you can build an experimentation culture where you go, this is safe to fail. So we can experiment a bit with it.
You were talking about leadership and how most people accidentally just fall into leadership and interviewing and all this sort of stuff. Have you had any formal training since then in leadership? And are there any formal training that you would advise leaders to get?
Big question. So yes, I have actually I've had several pieces. It's been a mixed bag, and I think it really will depend on the backstory of that person who's moving into leadership. Because somebody has moved more from a management position, and I see management and leadership being two very, very different things.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. How do you see them different? Management,
I see. This might not be the verbatim like dictionary definition of managing like procedural things. You know, I am managing this project, therefore I'm moving on the status of this project, making sure things are happening, making sure I'm line managing, making sure this person's career moves on, or it is the active management of some of the variables and the progress of something.
Okay.
Leadership, I see as more being setting tone and direction and inspiration and guidance and mentoring and so I'd say I'm a very bad manager. Don't ever get me to project manage anything. I'm a bad manager. I'm not organized enough. I'd like to think I'm much more effective as a leader than a manager. So this is where you say even somebody who's been in management for years, I've managed all these projects, like you might still need some of the fundamentals, tenets of leadership still though. Somebody who has progressed up from maybe being a senior development into a leadership or management role might need other things. They might need actually management training as well. They might need to understand some of the sort of principles of management before they even go to leadership, depending on what they're moving into. So there's a load of different things you can cover with people. I mean, and there's some stuff that you can just go, these are qualities of leader that anybody should learn at any given point. Things like active listening. Or mindful listening. You know, I practice mindfulness meditation, and there's a great book on mindful communication by the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and part of it is mindful listening and making sure that you're fully present in a conversation and listening and asking questions with compassion and those kind of things. And I think those you can give those to anybody at any stage in the career, and hopefully they'll benefit from them.
Yeah.
But there are some things where you just go like these are probably so important that everybody should have them, but especially leaders, because there's somebody who's leading who can't listen, isn't interested in what they're doing, and isn't inspirational. Might call them a dictator rather than a leader. I don't know, but you wouldn't necessarily be a good leader. No. I'm trying to keep it PG friendly for the listener.
Thank you. Oh God, that's so interesting. Yeah, and I love that making that distinction though, because I think people do talk about what you just said there, but they don't make the clear distinction between the activities and the responsibilities of a manager versus a leader. And I love that you said you can be a leader because you might be like an inspirational person and all that sort of stuff, but you might not know how to give feedback perhaps in the best way, or
yeah, exactly,
or CPD and that sort of stuff.
And I think, but things like giving feedback is another really good example of all leaders and managers should know how to do this.
Yeah,
and should be taught how to do it. But also it's never too early to start. And we've at Create Future, we've put everybody on, training for how to give effective feedback, because it's a dynamic feedback culture is so important. Why wait a year to find out about somebody who's displeased about 11 and a half months ago? Well, what's the point in that? Let's have a culture where this feedback is timely and useful and compassionate at the same time, without being overly flowery and but still getting to the point where it's part of compassion in feedback is also telling people what they need to hear. Yeah. So compassion doesn't necessarily mean be kid gloves with everybody. Sometimes the best thing you can do for somebody is upset them with something. You just try and do it as kindly as you can while still getting the point across.
Yeah, being kind and nice, I think, are two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it is kinder and better and much more better. And I've heard this before, where people have said that, they got some feedback that was very hard for them to swallow, but they reflected upon it and it changed their career trajectory.
Yeah.
And also growth, openness and growth mindset for leadership. As a tech person, it was very easy for me to get into a rut, many years ago. Like, I'm fantastic technically. I don't need to listen to other people's technical opinions. And anybody think that's such a trap. No matter how good you are, there's somebody. First of all, there's other opinions and other. You can't know it all in tech. It's too big nowadays. I mean, even decades ago, you couldn't know it all. So you should always be open to hearing about other things. No matter how good you are as a technologist, but also there's always somebody better.
Yeah. And I guess as a leader, that humility is so important. It's, I always think with giving someone, or trying to tell someone the truth, whether it's someone at work or a friend, I think how important it was that the person need hear it, depending on how hard it hits them initially. Because I do think with the best feedback, it sets you free, but first it really does annoy you and upset you, and to an extent because it's kind of true, and you're like, it's set in truth. And
part of the trick, I think, is learning a good emotional regulation, because it's easy to just go off the deep end and have an emotional response. And this links back to things like cybersecurity. Things designed to have an emotional response. If there's anything designed in life to give you emotional response, you need to take a step back and not have that understand where that emotion's coming from and why. Yeah. Because that could be, if there's something I need to fix in myself, or something I need to change. It could be an opinion that just annoys you, and then, well, that's anybody can have any opinion about something, and does it really change the world? Or it could be somebody trying to get you to do something that you shouldn't be doing. So anything that elicits an emotional response to bypass your reasoning is time to do a little bit of breathing.
Wonderful.
And if you do a bit of breathing and control, that helps control your heart rate and switches your reasoning on.
Wow.
There's a great talk on that. Can't remember the exact title, but it's by a guy called Dr. Alan Watkins, no relation. And he's a neuroscientist, and I think it's how to be the best your best you every single day or something like that. It's a TEDx talk. It's on YouTube. It's absolutely incredible, and it's about using breathing to regulate your heart rate, which then regulates the availability of your frontal lobes and reasoning. Like, okay, so basically, thinking about how to become more grounded and mediate your response to things actually helps you do things just in general better.
I follow quite a few newsletters. Like, there's a few newsletters I really love. One's Shane Parrish, one's James Clear. I can't remember exactly who it is. Anyway, there was a quote in it recently that was like, everything or most things will work if they're unplugged and plugged back in, including you. It's kind of like having that like moment to rest. And just last question, I promise to leave you alone then. You seem like someone who loves to read. I mean, you mentioned a few books and articles and such on this podcast. If you had to give some recommendations of books, sorry, then that's a really tough question. Recommendations of books to people, what would you say to go and read?
Oh, that's a really tough one. It is a really tough one because there's loads of different kinds of books. I mean, if you're into management and leadership, like The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by
Wow.
Maybe you know about that one.
Yeah.
It's a classic. It's also not a very big read. It's something you can get munched through quite quickly. There's a couple of other interesting ones on kind of more almost like the neuroscience of algorithms. There's Algorithms to Live By. I can't remember the name of the author, unfortunately. I think there's one called Super Thinking as well, which is about a load of different mental models. I find mental models really fascinating because they show how people think. When it comes to coding, Clean Code by Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin, I think it should be required reading for everybody. There's so many great books on there. I mean, I find the books on AI to be an interesting one because there's just so many different ones that, and they fall into two camps, either incredibly technical or incredibly philosophical. Robot Rules by Jacob Turner, though, that's a really good one because it's around the sort of legalities, and not just the legalities, but also like the responsibility. How can you hold things like AI responsible for what it does? It's an incredibly dense read. It's one of those ones you won't flick through in even a week. There's about as many footnotes as there are words on each page because there's so many references. Fascinating topic. Quite if you're interested in the kind of the ethics and the legalities around AI,
go for that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Honestly, what a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
And
I enjoyed it too.
yeah, it's so interesting, and thanks for coming on, and hope to maybe get you on in the future.
Oh, I'd love to.
In 5 years' time, when robots have taken over.
Yeah.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.